A Fox News alert as we go back to the UN. We won't bore you with the speeches, but the Russians just put forth a resolution which, as you might imagine, was fairly favorable to them and their Syrian friends, not so favorable to the United States, the United Kingdom, and France that were involved in the attack. To say it failed miserably would be the understatement. Obviously, the United States, the UK, and France all with unilateral vetoes there. Noteworthy, it's been the Russians that have been protecting the Syrians at the United Nations. 6 separate resolutions at the Security Council that the Russians have vetoed to protect Bashar Assad and the Syrians specifically as it relates to chemical weapons. With that, we bring in Tom Rogan of the Washington Examiner. Good to see you, sir. This caught our eye from the New York Times this morning. In Moscow, a sense of relief after a limited Syria attack. And it appears as though both the Russians and the United States at the command level, certainly at the Mattis level and at their general staff level, went to great lengths to ensure that this did not escalate.
Yes, I think there is an understanding on both parts, Leland, that there is a lethality that both elements can deliver to each other. But I also think for the Russians, the major point here is, do these strikes endanger Assad's regime? And that's the critical Russian strategic interest. Clearly, no, they do not. And in that regard, I think the Russians quite relieved, quite happy.
So the Russians, it's unusual to sit here and be talking about the Russians quite relieved and quite happy. Is that tacit admission by the United States that we're not really willing to take them on not their home turf, but kind of sort of their home turf?
To a degree, it is. It's the caveat to the mission accomplished, right? It's the caveat in the sense that the United States has given up effectively in trying to remove Bashar al-Assad from power. The Russians are very happy about that. And at the same time, I think the Russians, from their point of view, if they can consolidate Assad, if they can just absorb these little pinpricks as they see them, then you know what? Who cares? We'll complain. It's the pageantry in public, but in behind the scenes, it's not a big deal.
Yeah, you do get even publicly this telegraphing back and forth. It was like, no, we didn't call them ahead of time, but we're very happy to report that no foreigners were killed in this.
Right. And it's a sort of, it's a reflection of the fact that when you have two great powers, there isn't really a particular interest in escalating unless you have to.
But is there a risk in not escalating? Is there a risk for President Trump? This isn't the first time we've hit the Syrians. The first time was back in 2017. We did even less than we did this time. Is there a risk in letting the Russians know, essentially, you've got veto power over U.S. military action?
I think there is a profound risk, and I would think as much as there is a tactical effect here that seems significant, at the strategic level, the repeated statements that we will do this again if we have to, that I think means in the coming months we should expect another chemical attack from Bashar Assad, with the Russians actually motivating to try and get the United States to blink and say, actually, we're not going to do it again a third time.
So in other words, you view the calculation as a little bit more than Assad deciding to use chemical weapons to clear out a given neighborhood. This was a test, essentially, by the Russians of the United States, of President Trump's resolve.
I absolutely think so. For the United States, the impetus here is to try and deter against chemical weapons use around the world. It's not about the civilians who died. For the Russians, in the same way, it's not ultimately about Assad, it's about the region. It's about the Saudis, the Egyptians, the Iranians, the Israelis, all of them coming to the Russians, coming to King Putin's table and saying, we know you are the man to deal with. And ultimately, that is why I think the Russians like to test.
Who won this round? In Tehran, in Beirut, in Bahrain, in Cairo, as they sit around and smoke Nagila and have some shakshuka. Who do they decide won this? Did President Trump win this, or did President Putin win this?
I think President Trump wins this round, but like boxing, there's another round coming up very soon, and I think they anticipate they will win that and ultimately win the match.
So far, no knockouts, but
no, absolutely not.
Point to President Trump. President Putin, though, seems to still have the scorecard on his side right now.
Absolutely. Putin always plays the long game.
Well, he's been managed to do that for a long time, and come back. A lot to talk about on the McLaughlin Group. We'll watch for it.
Thanks a lot, Leland. Appreciate it.
As always.